Hi, my name is America Francis. I'm here with Travis Marker, and we're going to talk about filling our lamps today. We're part of Steward Growth, and we do a lot of educational discussions and fun growth and exploratory conversations. We do these once a month on a variety of topics, and today we're going to be talking about self-care and being okay.
Yeah, I think the idea that we were exploring was the idea of one of the most important lamps we have is our own self. And there might be other lamps we can take care of as we are healthier, but it seems like it's really hard to focus on other lamps that are important, but maybe are less important if we are not ourselves actually like healthy or rejuvenated or not overworked or whatever it might be.
I like this idea of the spoons, the metaphor of the spoons. We've talked about it a little bit before. Some days you just don't have the same capacity as other days. Some periods of your life you have more energy, you feel more motivated or excited, or you just have the drive to get some certain things done. And sometimes it's more of a resting mode. You're kind of at the valley part of the cycle. And it's okay to accept the both sides of it, all the sides of it, because sometimes we kind of reward ourselves for the times that we're productive and the times that we're getting a lot done, or things are working out, and sometimes we kind of are disappointed in ourselves or kind of hard on ourselves for the times that we're resting. But when we talked about the seasons before, there are resting seasons, and the resting seasons are important. They have their role, and we're not always in the productive and the energetic cycles. Sometimes the resting cycles help us to think about important things that we don't think about when we're busy and when we're scheduled. So, and also that empathy and the compassion for people who are in their resting cycles or in really tough times of life. You've mentioned before, there's the level of your adversity or whatever and your capacity to deal with it, and sometimes the adversity feels more overwhelming than your resources, and we can help other people and be compassionate when they're feeling those differences in their capacity with the loads under pressure.
Yeah. I think that sometimes it's just having that awareness that like it's not working, like how do we, because I think our society expects us to push through or play through or like keep going, and at some point we have to have the like our thermometer or barometer or whatever that says no, I'm really like not going to work this out. I know that it seems like with COVID, we've come up with some more socially acceptable reasons to like actually stop, because people would say, I wasn't feeling well today, so I'm going to still go to work and expose everybody to whatever I've got. Where I think with COVID, we can actually say, no, it's okay. You can stay home. Like we don't, we want you to stay home because we really don't need a pandemic right now.
But I
Um,
think part of that idea is that it's external. And I think something we're talking about today is being able to accept internally that we can make those statements, because a lot of us do focus on what are other people saying is okay for me to do right now
yeah.
versus am I okay, and listening to myself instead of allowing myself permission only if someone else gives me that permission.
Yeah, you shouldn't need permission to be sick. Like, I mean, COVID, everybody's like, that's an external validation of your sickness. But how do we turn on our own personal internal validation to say, no, I'm just going to set a boundary today, not because I'm an introvert or whatever, but like I need a boundary today.
Yeah, we're not machines. I'm not here. I'm not just the cog in your wheel that I understand we're part of a team, whatever, but geez, like, and I understand that some people have a capacity to be very consistent and other people have more needs for flexibility and for breaks, and some of that variability we can support in various contexts and really help people lower their anxiety. Like if you're always anxious because you're not able to meet your own needs in your circumstances, like you and I can take some slow days and our working scenarios permit some flexibility. Some other people have to have that job to pay for the insurance or whatever, and they can't, maybe once in a while, but they could be having a lot of mental health stuff and just have to be at work because that's the reality of their situation.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good scenario to identify because when you just don't have the luxury of taking a day off or taking a break, or then you have to look for different coping strategies like micro strategies or other allowances that bring that in. I know that even though I am self-employed, I still have kind of been involved in stuff that has not allowed me to take the day off, or and that means that I had to look for, well, then what if I have to play through longer here, then what am I going to adjust? Because like it's budgeting your resources, and some of that's like your spoons, like which of these are the most important, like what has to happen, because maybe if you're a school teacher and you have to go, maybe your prep day or your prep period is the thing that is like more important, or maybe um if you have a teacher's assistant, maybe the teacher's assistant has to play a little bit better role that day. The question is, I guess, at what point is it becoming an obstacle or interfering with your work to the point that other interventions have to be upgraded or come in at a higher level?
We also talked about burnout for a second because sometimes you can make temporary or some kind of additional shore up your resources, but if you do it for too long, sometimes you can get so burned out that it takes a really long time to recover and you have to shut down. I mean, sometimes people go hospitalized or, you know, you can get in a really bad place if you don't stop and say this isn't working early.
I agree. Well, and I know that with myself, I can get burned out, and some of it also relates to just like post concussion stuff, like that I have a different regulator than I used to have, that the other regulator might have been able to endure more or play through more. And so I'll do things like, I'm going to go on a 3 mile walk, not because I'm going to go fast, but I know that once I get out far enough, I just have to keep walking in order to get back. But it forces me to get my exercise in, right? Because I try to get my 7,000 daily steps, and sometimes that's the goal for that day. Is I'm not gonna just stay in bed and be in bed the whole time. Like I need to get out of bed. I need to make sure I'm eating my food. I need to take a shower, maybe a hot shower or just a longer shower. But I need to get the exercise in. So even though like I recognize I'm gonna maybe hide from a bunch of other stuff, um, it's not going to be a problem to set my minimum goals, and maybe even I short my minimum goals, because like I'll try to have 60 minutes of active, you know, heart rate. Maybe that day I don't get 60 minutes of active heart rate, but I do get 7,000 steps, and that's just walking and just going out and just forcing myself to do it, because I've had one where I walked a good part of Park City, um, just and I my heart rate actually barely went up like the whole time. I was like, well, that is a very crappy walk. But to go, almost 4 miles, it burned like 200 calories. Like that's a pretty slow walk. But I'm like, I got my steps in. I achieved the minimum goal. You know, like tomorrow will be another day.
And are there ways that we can challenge and push ourselves a little bit that are gentle?
Yeah, sure.
Because I mean, you can bully yourself into doing things, or you can just say, this is good for me. And if I don't do it, then maybe just today was a harder day to get it done. and
Oh,
not.
sure.
I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
I was really hard on myself for a long, long time. Just like get in line and make it happen and push. And I just really benefited from talking to myself gently
yeah,
after
well,
that.
and I think that that's part of the, I guess that's what I'm saying was you set the micro goals instead of like your, like the whole day has to be like a big accomplishment. Maybe it's just like, I'm going to get this done. Like even I know that shortly after my accident, and when I actually started to figure out I needed self-care because I didn't need self-care for many months, which made everything super chaotic and crazy because I was just like, I'll just tough through it. I know I had to say, look, I have 10 things I'm going to get done today. And they were just like the basics. And I felt like if I got those 10 things done, it was a good day.
I
And
mean, 10 things sounds like a lot of things to me, actually.
yeah, but it would be like, um, I'm going to eat 3 meals would be one, right?
I think that could be a lot some days,
Right.
figuring
So
out how to eat and what to eat.
yeah, just that I would eat 3 times, that I would try to get some exercise in, that I would at least engage with because I have to do accounting with my office every day. Like that's something that has to happen. Um, I had to respond to a certain, emails like every day. So like I'm like, if I got through those 10 things, which are fairly the minimum of my day, because my day usually has way more than 10, I'm like, just give yourself a break.
What were your hours like right before the accident? Had you slowed down a little bit over your peak of I'm a really busy lawyer, or were you right in the prime busy?
I was like, before I got in the car accident, I was easily 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Very energetic, very motivated, very compulsive, probably even a workaholic because I really wasn't going to the gym. Like I was basically just working, and I, very motivated. My family life was struggling because I was workaholic. So like it reset a lot of things because a lot of different things became priorities because that, like when I went to the voc rehab people, they're like, no, you have to go to the gym, because you need to hit like you have to make your heart perform so much blood flow, because I didn't realize how much blood flow is important to your brain.
Mm.
And so they're like, if your heart's not going at least at this rate, you're not getting enough blood into your head. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So like it forced me to actually figure in, if I want a healthy head, I have to get this much blood flow. And if I but then they're like, well, yeah, if you're not sleeping, it's not working. And I'm like, well, I used to only sleep like 4 to 6 hours a night, and just got on with it. And they're like, yeah, that's not going to work. So it was amazing how many other things had to be priorities. But then also like my family was like, you've been crazy. If if this is going to work, and if you want us to support you, like there has to be more balance, even with the family and family time. And so it was amazing how it was a tremendous blessing because it recalibrated like everything. Have you had something similar where you kind of had to recalibrate everything?
I've had a number of different things actually. I've had some health challenges that have been really ongoing and difficult. My latest one is, I mean, basically just shook up all the things and I still don't know how to put them back together. It won't go back the same way. So I'm happy to kind of, what are my big pieces and where do they go and how do I relate in all of these roles and contexts and
Yeah,
like.
and I think it's different depending on what force of trauma is hitting our body, right? Like, because I've doing divorces for many years, I could, you can tell that people in a divorce scenario have it's a different trauma because they're losing a support player or a person who they thought was a support player, or they're actually not having to focus on the trauma from the non-support player. Like the fact that they actually have freedom can be a little bit traumatic because they've lived in like on guard mode for so long. based upon the potential triggers of a relationship. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty impactful thing, is to like realize you're actually don't have to be in trauma today. And so, but there's a little bit of a shock to that because you're used to living in trauma. You're used to living prepared for trauma. And all of a sudden the absence of trauma is kind of like, wow, like what do I do? But then
Some
you're,
people seek the drama because they miss the adrenaline
yeah.
or
So
the
then people
dopamine or
know that,
whatever.
yeah, they pick it up with a new like bad relationship, or they if they have adrenaline issues. Like we had a military guy who was like special forces, but
Mhm.
he had enough concussions and stuff that happened through what he did that they had to like furlough him. Like, you know, he got disabled, he got a disability rating,
Mhm.
but he now missed adrenaline. Like he was not living in fear of his life the whole time. Like, and so his self-care was a
He was
little bit,
addicted.
yeah, well, I think it's addictive, but it's also like it's your equilibrium, right? Like if you're not living in a certain level of stress.
You have a different set point.
Yeah. So he bought a bullet bike and would intentionally create traffic issues where he would like go between semis, and he would, just so he could show he could do it, and just so he could kind of like keep.
So what happened? Did something bad happen?
Well, no, I mean he was just exploring how like he had to create adrenaline, uh but then he also had to eventually figure that out. Like he had to kind of de-escalate from, from that intense
You had to
trauma.
find some safer adrenaline.
Yeah, well, and I had another guy, who talked to me about being in Iraq, like when cafes are being blown up, like he's like, bombs are going off, and they would often stand like leg locked with the guy behind them so that they knew that they had their back covered. And he says, like, when you realize your back guy just got shot because like that person's not there anymore, and the rest of the cafe's blown up, and he says, like, my wife's a little bit upset with the way I have self-care. and
Sure.
and it was stuff that, he had self-care, like things that he was doing that were super
Hyper
dysfunctional.
vigilant. Yeah.
Yeah, hyper vigilant, dysfunctional, like definitely not good for a
PTSD
marriage.
stuff.
Yeah. And so I'm like, huh. I said, you're really regulating at a totally different place. So why don't we just give yourself some grace, and let's just kind of keep working through this,
It's
because
reasonable under the circumstances.
yeah, but it also means that it's not irrational that his wife would be impacted by the things that he was doing for self-care that were like dealing with tremendously traumatic issues.
Yeah, sure.
Like his burnout was like on a totally different level, right? So I think
Well,
it's,
then we can talk about like adrenal resource. Like sometimes you have to do specific things to address what's actually going on.
yeah, and I think we've talked about the book, The Body Mind Stress Reset, or whatever that book was, the stress mind
That one
stress.
stress book.
Yeah, the Mind Body Stress Reset.
Yeah.
I found it tremendously helpful just to realize that you experience different forms of stress that impact your body in a different way. And just by being able to kind of sense in your head, what am I experiencing,
Mhm.
it at least kind of helps extend your connectivity to the thing that also might be causing you the stress, because
If
you're
you don't have any way of describing what am I experiencing, it can be difficult to figure out what that to label it to see it.
yeah, well, and I think you're identifying, like, that has specifically been said about children, that when young children have had trauma, they often are just saying, I do not know what I just experienced, but I am not well. Like, I'm going to cry a lot right now, or I'm going to sleep a lot right now, or I'm going to have tantrums, or I'm going to react. But it doesn't mean adults are not subject to the same issues.
Well, and sometimes it's even worse if you should be crying and you're not. If you just stuff your emotions for years as an adult, then you have your body is feeling those effects and you're not able to kind of process through it.
No, I totally agree. And I think that that's one of the stresses I think that comes with even some of our roles, like our gender roles or the roles that we've assigned ourselves. Because I've read a lot of books like on men and men being told, you know, they got to just stay on the white horse and like get it all done, and like they're not supposed to cry, they're supposed to be tough, they're supposed to play through, they're supposed to suck it up, you know.
Be sensitive, but don't pay attention to your own feelings.
Yeah, well, be sensitive, but don't actually be sensitive. Like I need you to be so much of a jerk because it lets me know that you're still tough or you're still like hard.
It's impossible.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown has some really good stuff on on just men, women, and shame, and the way we do or do not allow ourselves to experience awareness of limits and how we're going to appropriately respond to those limits.
And we used to have pretty developed kind of fixed gender roles, and now there's so much change that it's harder for guys to know, like before guys used to be over here and now there's this whole scale, and for this person it's okay here, and if it's another point about needing to be okay internally because there's so many different requirements or expectations by different people or organizations that if you're looking at multiple things, you can't be all those things at the same time.
Right. And I think in regards to your previous comments, like if you're trying to adapt your stress responses to stereotypes, like you're basically not going to be able to do it very well. Like you're going to always be competing, and part of that competing is also a stress where if you're not just with yourself, absent the external factors by way of expectations or by way of like social norms or cultural, you know, expectations regarding where you should be, it's harder to distance yourself enough from those triggers and stimuluses to just say, I'm going to just take a break.
Well, I think people have a difficulty sometimes figuring out their identities because there are so many different voices going on. So they just feel disorganized because they don't have any kind of set place. It's all relative.
Yeah, exactly. So what are ways you like distance yourself from social norms or expectations? Like how do you say, I'm just not going to embrace this today?
I think my vision board's pretty good. I kind of had to identify what my highest values were, and then I kind of measure my activities or my choices against that defined list of values. I evaluate things a lot, actually. So, and sometimes I just look for good things because they're good, and that makes it a little easier than saying, what are all the activities? I'm just like, well, what would be really good? And then I pick the activities from there.
Yeah, well, I know sometimes I just kind of fail at it, you know, like because I'm aware of all the different social pressures and things, you know, like I'm aware people are expecting me to be certain places, and I I don't. I think sometimes I'm not, at least in my situation, I'm not always good about getting the social break, but some of that it becomes a challenge because then I become aware that I'm not escaping the break. You know, I'm not escaping the norm. And so I'll say, look, just sit here. Like you can expect that the norm exists and you're just not going to comply, but that doesn't mean it's still not causing you some stress. But sometimes you just have to like be aware and not, and just say, I have to not comply, and I'm going to deal with the consequences because this is just where I'm at, you know, like um but I'll still be aware people would expect me at that meeting right now, or people would expect me at whatever, even if I say I'm not going to be able to make it. um it doesn't mean I'm still aware
Yeah.
that there might be some fallout from taking care of myself.
I think that I've kind of felt not like the norm a lot of my life. And so I've spent a lot of energy trying to help other people feel comfortable, even though I'm not meeting their expectations. So that other focus has been pretty consistent. And it can be really stressful because I can try really hard to meet that norm. And sometimes it's actually nice to feel part of some communities that are more accepting of deviations. I'm on some Facebook support groups and some other, and like, I just got some diagnoses 2 years ago, and I've actually given myself some permission based on what I know about those to just sing out loud in the car and do some things that are perfectly fine to do, but like letting my hair down a little bit and just being okay with having personality. Because for a while I noticed that my affect was pretty flat because I was just trying to, I don't know if invisible is the right word, but just like not to offend people just by being boring, kind of a gray rock idea. And I really like my personality, so it's kind of fun to just be like, I can wear colorful things and I can play, and you know,
Yeah.
I can get
Well,
excited about things and be enthusiastic when I'm talking to people.
do you ever I like Harry Potter, and sometimes the person that I think a little bit about is Luna Lovegood
Yeah.
because she's like socially awkward in her authenticity,
Yeah.
and she just is kind of like comfortable with being super awkward, and it appears that she's aware, but she's also just kind of raw about it. But she's also in Ravenclaw, right? So Ravenclaw's like the very intellectual smart house. Like it's the the intelligent people go to Ravenclaw.
Okay.
And yet she believes in mythological things, and it's kind of interesting because witches, there's there's actually witches who don't believe in mythological things, and so it's funny that J.K. Rowling's would kind of create that dilemma that even for witches there would be stuff that you just wouldn't believe in, and yet there's Luna Lovegood, and um the fact that she just kind of flows with things, like she just realizes that she will be picked on but people will get over it, and like because at one point she's trying to get all of her it's the end of the semester and everybody's taken all of her different stuff and hidden it, and so she puts up lists of the stuff that she needs back, and Harry's kind of like, well, do you want me to help you get it all back? They're like, no, it'll come, like she's actually a little bit kind of Taoist in her idea that life will happen and it will be fine, but she gets to embrace herself, and it'll work out. And I think that that's a tremendously difficult place to be.
Something I like to do sometimes is just appreciate that we're not all the same, because sometimes I'm like, everyone could try and fit in the same mold or the same template. But how interesting is that when everyone's thinking the same thoughts? And I really like it when I hear somebody else out here doing something interesting or, just fun, or like we need some variety. That's how the world is interesting, and that's how we solve different kinds of problems. If people don't think about different ways to do things, then we don't get the inventions and we don't get the improvement. So I kind of give myself a little of that, like, I can be quirky and there's a place for me and people can appreciate my being different.
Yeah, do you actually measure your quirkiness by way of an actual response? Like I was listening to the No More Nice Guy syndrome, and there was this guy who had an identity related to his car. And his car, he felt like if it was not spotless and totally cleaned up inside, somebody would shame him. So his exercise was to not clean his car at all for 1 month. and to see actually what the response was. Did anybody shame him? Did anybody care? Did anybody actually in some way disenfranchise him because of the status of his car? And at the end of it, he was actually surprised that nothing happened, right? Like, I mean, it was expected from our side to say, well, yeah, well, who would care? But from his side, he was literally like, nope, nothing happened. So I give myself, I'm not tremendously quirky. I actually like being not exactly a wallflower, but like I don't try to be very visible when I go out in public. But there are times that I'll say, this is like might be an adventure for me to wear a stocking cap that has color in it, besides like blue. and and so sometimes I'm like, I'm just gonna try this stocking cap out, and I'm gonna see how it goes. Inevitably nothing happens, but sometimes my kids will say, "Oh, Dad, that's a little bit adventurous for you," and but they're not. I mean, I appreciate they're not shaming, but I think it's interesting just when we look at by way of like branching out, what what's the worst thing that could happen, and would it even happen? Like if you actually tried that thing, would anybody even would they care? I know that some people actually are tremendously sensitive and say, and nobody noticed, which becomes like a negative thing. But I
Mhm.
think if we're referencing off of ourselves as the first step, that should be a good sign that like you should be able to kind of develop yourself regardless of the fact that nobody notices. Like, but I think some people are very sensitive to the fact that people are not engaging with them, and that makes them feel even more alone and more isolated. And so when they take steps to be more visible, and they weren't more visible, then it's even more destructive to themselves. But I think that's also identifying they're referencing off the wrong source. Like we have to reference off ourselves and whatever has got our glow going, right? And we have to turn that up.
Definitely.
How hard is it to reference off yourself? Like, do you find that easy to like just say between you and God and that's it? Or
Um, it depends. Sometimes I get really strong in myself and I feel really good about that. And sometimes if I go home and visit my parents and I'm with my siblings, I pop back into some old habits and patterns.
I think it was tremendously difficult as a therapeutic assignment to actually focus on that. Like it took me a long time to say like I'm actually okay with myself. Like to be fine going to a restaurant by myself or going, shopping by myself or just
Mm.
just like I'm okay being with myself. It definitely takes some work. Like you have to consciously say, I'm fine. I don't need another person tonight or with this activity
Mhm.
or
Yeah, I actually was really surprised at how okay I was being by myself. I expected when I had some more time away from my family that I would have a harder time. I never expected to live by myself or really be in that situation by choice, and it's been okay. I did have a therapist one time tell me to stop referencing this other person. I'd be like, he thinks this and he wants this. And she was like, I don't want to hear anything about him the whole session. Like, where are you? What are your thoughts? And that stuck with me for a long time where I was just like, what do I even think? Because I was so used to like adjusting to someone else's preferences. I really wasn't referencing off me. And I started to do that, and it was really helpful.
yeah, I totally agree that I noticed in the book Stop Walking on Eggshells, which
Yep.
talks about high conflict situations, that is one of the references that you're overcoming codependency and how it actually might have been codependent no more. But I think
Mm-hmm.
they both reference the idea that when your dialogue changes and the other person is just not relevant to the situation or you're not referencing off that other person, that is a sign that you're making like progress.
Yeah, I listened to something the other day that was talking about making accommodations for other people's anxiety. And that's a thing that happens a lot for me. Like the next day, I was watching myself making adjustments because of comments Catherine was making about I'm uncomfortable with this and I need this and I want this. And I was behaving and I was like, wait a second. And then I started thinking about things I'd done with other family members, and they get used to it and they don't like it when you change it. And I just checked out a book that helps parents who have anxious children learn how to say it's okay for you to be anxious and what are you going to do about it, instead of me taking the responsibility to help someone be comfortable, putting that back where it belongs and helping them make the choices they want to make, instead of me trying to fix the outside circumstances so that they can feel more comfortable. You were talking for a minute ago about people being okay with themselves. And I think as people change in their lifetimes, that can be really stressful too, because they can get used to how they are in this time. And then big changes can happen with life transitions and unexpected events. But just, your kids all leave or you graduate from college, and making those changes to yourself can be really uncomfortable if you get fixed in this is who I am. As you change who you are, it can feel uncomfortable.
Well, particularly if you reference off your routines and your predictable, factors and patterns, like people who eat at a restaurant like every Thursday with the guys and that restaurant closes, or they're like, no, I always do this on this day. Um,
Or if they work for the same company for 20 years and
yeah,
then they have to switch, like some people haven't done a lot of interviewing or whatever, job hunting stuff. If they've been in a job for 20 or 30 years and they have to go interview and find a new job, everything about work is different.
yeah. Like my uncle is 80 years old and is still working, and he just does, like, I think he literally does not know how to stop doing it. Like whatever it means to him, you don't need to be 80 and still working, right? But it's
But sometimes people stop working and then they just die because they don't know how to transition.
they really do. Like there's people who go into retirement and die because they're like, I have no idea what happens next.
I don't have any hobbies. I don't have any outside relationships. I don't, it's stressful to be home with my wife. I don't know.
Well, and there's definitely that's what people also get divorced is because they're like, we're not hanging out all the time.
Yes.
Like this is not going to be how retirement is. You're gonna go golfing, you're gonna go like, yeah. So I've had people in the divorce situations where they're like, no, we're going to have separate things. Even my mom
Are
and
we going to stay married or are we going to get divorced? But we're going to be separate either way.
dad, yeah, but like my mom is a quilter, and that's one of the things she did with my dad was like, she's like, I'm going to go into the quilting room for so many hours a day, and that's what I do, because she does some that are paid, but a lot of them are just she
Creative
has
outlet.
she has family quilts that she likes to do for the grandkids and for the couples upon certain timelines, and she has them all marked out. So I think she actually has her quilting calendar together for like 2 years, because she's like, it takes me about this long to do a quilt, and like these are the timelines. So like somebody's turning 8 or somebody's turning 18 or 16 for like the girls or something. I can't remember, but like she's like, this is planned, and so I need this to happen, even though it has no value to our marriage. It's how I find value. And I don't know if she's had all this conversation, but I know the gist is when I go over to the house, I often find her in her quilting room, and my dad is gone to the gym or doing out whatever he does.
She is not available. And what if she had an injury that made it difficult to quilt? Maybe her eyesight would be going bad, or maybe her hands would get arthritis or something. And her entire life is focused on quilting. So making a change away from quilting would be really difficult for her.
Yeah, well, one of the adaptations that she made a while ago was she had to find different machines, but it allowed her to still adapt and adjust to. Um, I don't know exactly if there's any physical things, but I know that the technologies had changed. So she upgraded. But I think that's the idea with all of us is that if something's important, then we have to upgrade. Like we have to be willing to adapt and change and upgrade or deviate, or like we were talking about yesterday, sometimes we just surrender and we say, maybe it's not important that I keep
New
up with
hobby.
this. Yeah, maybe.
And then what were your dad's expectations when he came home? Did he think he would be hanging out with your mom and doing things recreationally and going out for lunch and stuff like that?
I don't know what he thought, but he has adapted. Like my dad's a very charismatic person. Like he likes to go out and connect with people. So he has he has quite a few guys that he does work with, like carpentry, because he's a welder, but
Mhm.
uh, he ends up being involved in other construction projects. But these are all kind of retired people who just keep building stuff. It's not like they don't have the time pressures as like when they were involved in, like they had to build it by a certain time. And so it's more like this group of older guys who are just able to go out and just keep working on stuff. And they have projects like
Yeah,
they fix the back wall or they fix, somebody's shed or
that sounds really fun. And and was he surprised that your mom was who your mom was, or was she just that way the whole time and his life changed to where he used to be out working and now he's home, but maybe her life was the same either way.
I think that she's she's like she was a stay-at-home mom until I was like in high school and then she got a job and she did that for many years and then and he used to have a job where he was stably employed like with like a sheet metal shop, but then he went out on his own, so his flexibility became a lot more open where
Mm.
hers was a little bit more predictable because she had to work so many hours and she'd come home and then she could quilt. So I don't think that the transition was tremendously hard because he was already a little bit fluid. He just thought when she retired, she would be more available. And she kind of had just to say, no, I'm still going to do these things. Like I still need to pursue my passions. And I think the harder one was they went on a mission for the church and they had to be together quite often. And in that scenario, mom said, because my dad always likes to go to the gym. He does water aerobics and goes to, does lifting and, plays sports or whatever. He played racquetball
Fun.
and so they they had to recreate some of that flexibility inside the mission setting because they were together so often that they did have to say like, look, you need to go to the gym again. You need
It can
to,
be stressful.
yeah, just what I think that the idea of um like the Wired for Love book talks about how some people are waves and some people are islands, meaning like some people are introvert and some people are very charismatic. And I think if you can embrace your attachment style and say, look, this is how I rejuvenate. Like I'm going to need to rejuvenate for a couple hours, but I'll be available to you for dinner tonight. Or so maybe you're helping the other person feel checked in with. So like you've checked in with their expectations in a civil way, say like, what do you need me to be available
I
for?
still care about you.
Yeah, I still care about you, but I'm also going to go do some things because I, I need I need to
You need one
rejuvenate.
person and I need 10 people.
Yeah. Right. So there was cool things that did happen. Like they went to Scotland on the mission and my dad found a community rec center and on
Mhm.
Thursday nights they they improvised music. And I didn't really actually know my dad could do that super well, but my dad could improvise on the piano.
Mhm.
And so he actually was very stimulated by the kind of the jam sessions. It wasn't like super heavy, but they would just kind of create folk songs, folksy music, and he'd play the piano and had a good time. And so he was still able to kind of like find places in the community where he could express himself and get that connection with the 10 people. And mom was like, yeah, she was okay.
Well, that sounds like a really good way to develop relationships that would be helpful in a sharing missionary environment.
Yeah, like it worked for them. Like they were able to adapt to the community setting as well as they had to be flexible enough to reinvent the expectation or recreate the expectations.
So you were mentioning earlier about being aware of who you are and what you need. And that's a scenario where the mission was flexible enough to allow those uh, adjustments, but your parents had to know themselves well enough to say, this is what I prefer. This is how I want to spend my time. I need a little bit more going on. And those are important life skills to know when something isn't working right. What can I add or subtract that will help things work a little better for me?
Yeah,
Because
because they,
sometimes we expect the other person to do it, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm not okay. Maybe you fix something, but we're really responsible for our own.
Yeah, I mean, I think you take the mission had its own expectations about what was supposed to get performed. And as soon as the couple could reconcile themselves to those expectations, then they could then decide where all the deviations might be able to be allowed outside of the main expectation. Yeah, but I think that that's like what we have to do is say, like, if I'm looking at the things that have definite requirements, how do I maybe meet those, or how do I postpone those, or how do I deviate from those and still get the care I need in order to fill.
And how do I ask for accommodations? Like, maybe there's a pretty standard way to do it, but maybe it's okay if I do it a little differently.
Yeah, like
Maybe we can get the same result going about it a different way. Maybe I work different hours and take longer breaks.
exactly. I since I haven't worked for somebody for a long time, the idea of taking like people will say they have a break at 11 or they have a break at 2 for 15 minutes. Oftentimes I'm like, what does that mean? Like, why
They're
do you
so
need that?
short. They're painfully short.
Yeah, or then you had a half hour lunch or you had an hour lunch, and I'm thinking, why does it need to be so long? Because like for me, like I sit down, I eat, and then I get back to work, or I eat while I'm working, or I take a phone call while I'm walking, or like I build, I I'm not like nobody's giving me permission to take a break. Like that doesn't even make sense to me. Like I take the break, but I fit the break in when I know that there's a gap. Or so it's interesting how sometimes the structured nature of employment sometimes prevents like that ability to deviate and say, man, how am I going to get till 11 o'clock to get my break when I'm like that first period of class was like out of control.
Yeah, I think the 8 hour by 5 day schedule is not ideal for a lot of people. And yeah, that's just tough.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that the mobile work became just so tremendously healthy for most people was that they realized that they were healthier. Like they got the work done. They still got, I know that there's a kickback from employers because I think it is a little bit more casual. Like there's probably a little bit less performance orientated outcomes. But I can't believe that on the other side that the employees just are not generally healthier.
I think one important part that you're alluding to is your engagement, because you're working because you're interested in the work and you're invested in your own uh, organization, your own company, and you care about it. And a lot of people are just surfing the internet while they're sitting at work. Like, the fact that you're interested in it and the fact that you like to work and that's engagement is huge.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think even I haven't worked with my paralegal in my office probably for 8 to 10 years because like her goal was she wanted to be able to stay home and take care of her child. And the nice thing was is she was able to keep her goal managed, and I paid less money because I wasn't paying for her just sitting at the office worrying about her child, or just sitting at the office, doing some emails or getting some other stuff done in the meantime. And and when I was able to deviate to say like, look, I just need you to help me with this stuff, and I got my stuff done, and it didn't require her to be a full-time employee, like, and I still got my same level of work done. Like that's like telling you there's a lot of surplus stuff that like it could be done way more effectively if we're just talking about performance oriented payment versus hourly payment.
I just did an organizational behavior project that had a paper, and one of my recommendations that was that employers look at, or this particular company look at ways to assess that were other than just time spent at work. Because the more we can define what people are doing and what the value is, the more flexible we can be about it. You know, we really, how helpful is it that you're sitting at work for this many hours? Like, there's got to be some better ways to define it. And I also, I did a Tech Moms course at the beginning of the year, and I asked several of the guest speakers, like, what are your part-time job share options? And a lot of people are just offering full-time stuff, or, you know, full-time contract or whatever. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for offering job share where somebody does 20 hours and the other person does 20 hours, and it's the same clients and it's the same work and they coordinate with each other. Just 40 hours doesn't have to be the norm.
Yeah, I think the question, well, even back in the 1860s, 1850s, when people were leaving slavery and serfdom, you know, like Russia, United States, and the middle class was growing because of like the Industrial Revolution. Even at that moment, they said, I shouldn't be a wage slave. And I thought, as I've revisited some of that literature, it's really interesting how even back then, people recognized they were not getting value just because they're working hours. Because even then, like they were coming off of farms where they were invested in the farm, like they were entrepreneurs, even though they're not like in a business setting. The fact that you are responsible for an entire farm, like that's business, right? That is your commerce. That's like you have to make sure it all works. You have to provide for your family, and they could work the entire day because they had to, because it was their thing. And now all of a sudden they're leaving the farms, they're leaving, you know, to go to the factories, and they're working wages, and they're being kind of exploited because they recognize they're getting consistent work and they're getting consistent pay, but it's not connected to something they have a passion about. It's also less than they need in order to meet their needs. And they're seeing like this, they're becoming disgruntled because it's the capitalist system, and they're recognizing, you know, Rockefeller and Carnegie and all these people are making a lot of money on their efforts. So now they're going to like rebel against them. And you're like, it's just that eternal angst that you recognize I'm going to something that I need because it's filling a gap I don't believe I can fill otherwise. And the other side isn't contributing the value you feel to make you feel enough engagement to feel invested in it. And so there's like this disgruntled angst that you're like, I'm selling myself short because I don't know what my other options are right now. Where I think if you look at that book, Future Proofing Yourself, I mean, it's talking about that idea of how do you create the side hustle that you get passion in, but maybe still, like you're saying, have that part-time job so that I have a consistent pay that's coming in. So I know maybe I can meet a lot of my needs, but I'm also pursuing a passion that's helping me feel like I'm meeting my purpose. And I think the workforce has been dealing with that for, you know, a very long time.
Yeah, we can definitely use some creativity and shaking things up. I think insurance is another thing that could really be benefited with some flexibility, because I don't think people should have to work a full-time job to be able to figure out an insurance option that makes sense.
But that's another problem is that it doesn't, even like with the adjustments in insurance, you can't work a full-time job to pay for insurance. Like if you're not on like the market plan, like the market plan subsidizes $900 a month, it says. Like that's not an affordable plan for anybody. Like, and if you make too much money, you get penalized and you have to pay like thousands of dollars. So because the subsidy, like in essence, it like expires and it becomes like 2,000 a month. And so you're like, so you actually have zero incentive to be in fact insured, because if you're a fairly healthy person, you could just save that money and you'll never spend 900 a month in healthcare, right?
Yeah, I like major medical options. Like people who have preventative care that just need to protect themselves against car accidents and cancer. Like,
Yeah, you definitely should protect yourselves against, like, that's what I've always been on I've been in the market plan since it was created because I've been self-employed. And I've also been on the very lowest plan because I just like we don't go to the doctor that often. But even if we did, like the deductible is $13,000. So it's still like so I have to pay, like without the subsidy, I'd have to pay 900 a month plus $13,000. Like there has to be a different solution because I mean, just like with housing, it's unaffordable, it's not sustainable. And I think that that's one of the powers of mobility and employment and self-employment is that if enough people defect just because they're like we can't participate, there has to be a market adjustment, and that's kind of the cool thing about the market is eventually there are market adjustments because people say like the gaps are too big, like there are people falling through on a too great a level, and we have to we have to pick it up. That's why healthcare companies will pay you to go to the gym because they're like, if you're healthier, like our costs go down, your costs go down, like those are just, they're tiny market adjustments, but it does show you that there are people factoring costs into the process, but there's also a lot of slush and overpay. And
that's why I think that economics is fun, freakonomics, all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
I sometimes wonder if I could have done, well, I know I could have, but just I was interested in so many things in college. And I think about different directions I could go. I'm really excited about our business stuff right now, though.
yeah. I love the I guess as we come into kind of the summary idea, I think the freakonomics is a super great concept because if you open yourself up to adaption, it's astonishing how the next thing happens.
Mm.
Like when you're thinking outside of your norms, or if you get to the point that you break everything, like you lost everything, and you just say, if I lost everything right now, what would be my next first step? And if it's like move to Florida, then maybe you should move to Florida, right? I mean, like sometimes, like getting to the point that you're in a freakonomics like adaption situation, like nucleus
Mhm.
explosion moment, those are really crucial because they tell you part of my burnout reflects I'm trapped and I'm in something that I systemically can't endure. So let's just pretend I get to stop enduring. Like, what would be my next explosive moment of creativity by way of like reinventing myself or reinventing this situation? Or
That's really important to identify what it is that you want, because you can look around and say, I don't want all of these things, but what is it that you want? And then you can take steps to go there. And it doesn't always have to be as hard as people think.
yeah,
There,
yeah, I totally agree. Like it's sometimes it's just surrendering to that step, right? Because I mean, like I say, moving to Florida, that's a pretty big step, But if somebody just says, I just would like peace, okay, well then turn everything off for a half hour, for an hour, get peace. Like force it to happen for a period of time. Maybe it's
or
5 minutes.
allow it to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, actively create the option for it to happen. Yeah, I totally agree. I think living actively and like you're saying, inside engagement is always the most healthy place, right? To if you're actively living, that tells you that you have a better shot than somebody who's not. Like if you're in awareness, you have a better shot than someone who's not. And
Be
it's not a
engaged in your own
competition.
life. Make choices for your own life.
Yeah, because it's I mean, and I say than somebody else, it's not a competition. The question is if you're referencing off something else, but you can first say, I'm actively aware or I'm actively engaging, that tells you you're healthier than you were 5 minutes ago if you were not at that point acting aware or actively.
Back to vision
So,
boards.
well, I think this has been a great hour. Tomorrow we're doing a literature in the law session with Scrivener's Quill, and that's part of our educational component with Steward Growth. We're going to be exploring The Mansion by Henry Van Dyke, which is a great old-timey story from the 1800s about how you identify value and actual charitable contributions. And then we're also going to be exploring A Season of Gifts by Richard Peck, which is a Grandma Dowdle book in her series. Richard Peck's really awesome, but these books were probably written in the early 2000s or like later 1990s. So they're very fun, very seasonal. But those will be fun to explore. And then if you want to check on stewardgrowth.com, you can see other classes that we teach, or go to our YouTube channel and type in Steward Growth and our channel will come up. And we have a lot of fun. But anyone's welcome to join. These are not presentations. Every once in a while, other people join, but more people are welcome.
And we are willing to take up your topics too, if you suggest some topics.
Yeah, definitely, like, submit things to us, submit ideas you'd like us to talk about. That'd be awesome. All right, have a great one.